Thank you to the Cumberland County Historical Society for hosting us this evening. We're going to do a presentation this evening on the National Guard of Pennsylvania and the Gobin Guards of Carlisle. It'll be the early history, so still in the blue uniforms back before World War I. So what is the NGP History Project? We're a group of volunteers. We formed in 2019. We focus on the state militia and the National Guard of Pennsylvania from post-Civil War up to the start of World War I, 1866, 1917. All volunteers, we have active duty military, currently serving National Guard, retired military, educators, tradesmen, government workers, students, come from all different backgrounds, just like the National Guard does. As far as we know, we're the only group of this type in the nation. You can go pretty much any historic site and see a Revolutionary War group or a Civil War group, but not too many people focus on the state troops in between the wars. So here's some of the events that we've done. We just did this one a couple years, like 2 years ago. This is at Gettysburg, just commemorating when the monument was put up in 1892. This was a couple weekends ago up at the State Military Museum for the 1916 mobilization. We have Mount Gretna, at Mount Gretna. This was something we did out in Maryland. And then again at the PA Military Museum, and this is over in Gettysburg. We set up a timeline of roughly 51 years of National Guard history. It was as much original items as we could get a hold of. So if you want to stay up to date with us, we're on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram. There's also our email there as well. So who here is currently in the National Guard? Anybody? All right. How about who served in the National Guard? All right. How about who knows somebody in the National Guard? So we had a lot of hands going up. So what I'd like to do is, the analogy I like to use is volunteer fire department. Everybody knows somebody who's in a volunteer fire department. Everybody's been to, a carnival or a bingo night or some kind of a function held at the fire hall, which back in the early days of the National Guard, that's what the armories were like. Not only was did they serve the community and the state, but there's also civic functions and social functions as well. And you see up here, this organization is in Philly, that's in Fairmount Park. They're having a fair to raise money for uniforms and equipment and things like that. This organization here, I believe that's up in New York. I think that's the State Fencibles. And you look, some of the uniforms are nicer than the others, so this kind of stuff costs money. So they're going to have civic events and have dances and picnics and things like that to raise money to buy some of that stuff, because the state didn't always fund it. So our State National Guard gets its start in 1747 with the Associators. Benjamin Franklin, he realized Pennsylvania needed a military force to protect its interests. So this militia organization was formed, and it served in the Revolutionary War, and it still has ties to units today. You have the 111th Infantry Regiment with Ben Franklin as their insignia, and 103rd Engineers. So those two units can trace all the way back to 1747. We don't have the oldest units in the National Guard, but we do have the oldest division, which we'll cover that a little bit later. So in order to get to what we want to talk about tonight, we've got to talk about the Civil War. That's a good kickoff point for how our militia and National Guard, came to be, to what we know now. So second to the state of New York, Pennsylvania raised 360,000 soldiers. We were number 2 for the amount of manpower in the Civil War. So we have all these organizations, 215 infantry regiments, independent infantry companies, artillery, independent batteries, cavalry regiments, independent, cavalry organizations, and even, the military is still segregated. So we had 10 regiments of United States Colored Troops as well, which is primarily out of the Philadelphia area. There's a lot of free African Americans in Pennsylvania during that time. So there was enough that we were able to raise 10 regiments. And that's not counting the others that went elsewhere. So if you've ever seen the movie Glory with the 54th Massachusetts, over 300 men were from Pennsylvania that were part of that unit. So about a third of their manpower came from PA. Plus we have all these militia organizations. In 1861, those were the companies that were already there. They were already serving, and then some new ones. 1862, You know, we have Lee pushing up into Maryland for the Maryland campaign. It's getting a little too close for comfort, so we're raising more men. Everybody knows about 1863. We had Gettysburg. They were here in Carlisle, York, even pushing up towards Harrisburg. So Pennsylvania was pretty worried at the time. And then 1864, they came north again and, you know, got Chambersburg. So these are all Pennsylvanians at different points during the war. So we have all those men in uniform. And what happens after the fact? You know, we don't have the American Legion like we do now, and groups for, you know, these men to join, or, you know, a lot of these organizations are disbanding. There's not a need to have those military units anymore. And a lot of those guys like the camaraderie. You know, your whole neighborhood went out and joined. You went through a lot of tough times together. You endured a lot of stuff. You know, went to training together. So you kind of get that bond, and you kind of want to stick with that. So they formed what was called the Grand Army of the Republic, and it was pretty much the American Legion of its day. And that's what these guys are. You know the medals they have here. These men here are from York, but Pennsylvania, you typically see this white vest. That was one of their trademarks. A lot of these guys, they wanted that association with the comrades in arms, the like-minded individuals. They had seen it and done a lot of things in their service, and you know they didn't have PTSD back then like they do now. They did. They just didn't call it that. But there are just some things that, you know, when you go through stuff with people, it's just, you don't even have to talk about it. You just kind of know, and that's their way of coping. And it's a good way, you know, the organization was founded to, you know, remember their comrades. You know, they want to put these monuments up. That's where we get our Memorial Day from, decorating the graves. Some like the military. They like that environment. They want to continue to serve. So, you know, the National Guard or the state militia at the time, that was a good option. And some were just going back to what they did before the war. You know, kind of like these guys. Here's a younger guy here, but there's a couple older men in here too. So a lot of them were going back and rejoining their organizations or starting new ones. Here's the GAR medal, the one that we saw on the guys in the middle. And this is right here in Carlisle. The General Meat Association, they were meeting at the armory for the Gobin Guards. And then this right here is for the cemetery to go and decorate the graves of their comrades. So it was a pretty big thing back then. If you get into the newspapers.com, you read some of the stuff that they did. It was pretty interesting, you know, how formal the processions were, all the groups that participated, and some of the other events that they did. And we've even seen pictures of the National Guard of Pennsylvania, different guys that are wearing their GAR member medals, or even their sons, the sons of veterans medals. Oh, got a glitch there. There we go. So after the Civil War, this is our state's military force. We have 4 divisions, which are geographic regions. Philly is the Gray Reserves, which is a pretty large organization. Over here in York, we have the York Zouaves and the Ziegel Guard. And then these different divisions, they don't even have organized units. It's just these guys are on the militia roll. So these aren't actual Pennsylvania guys. These are representative of what the militia would have looked like at that time, still wearing the Civil War uniforms and the equipment, which they would have ended up wearing up through the 1870s and in some items up into the 1880s. So the 1870s, this is what Cumberland County is looking like. It's the 15th Division. We have the Mechanicsburg Zouaves, the Cumberland Guards, Union Guards, South Cumberland Guards, Russell Infantry, and then we have, from Perry County, we have the Russell Guards, which is cavalry. And you note the notation colored on the back of here. That's actually how it's written in the official documents, the Adjutant General's report. The National Guard and the military, they're still segregated. At least now you have African American officers, which that's something new that came out of the Civil War, but yeah, they still had segregated organizations. So in 1870, we have all these different militia companies that have sprung up, but we don't have a real organization for it, and things were still pretty top-heavy, and it was more of a social organization than it was a military organization. So they're trying to clean that up a bit. We changed the name of the state's military force. It's now the National Guard of Pennsylvania. It's no longer the militia. We have what's known as the militia tax, 50 cents for anybody who is of military age and ability. if you aren't signed up on a roll of a local company, you'll be taxed annually 50 cents. Unless you're exempt. So exempt would be, if you're a policeman or a fireman or something of that nature. Which was a nice source of revenue for a while, but they ended up repealing that tax. And that money would go to each of it would be divvied up amongst the commands in the area to purchase uniforms, equipment, things like that. And if there was a military district that didn't have any companies, the money would go to the local school districts. We now have a provision for court-martial. So when you join the militia, you're going to do what you're supposed to, or you'll be held accountable. It's not pick and choose when you want to drill kind of thing. We also have 5-year enlistments. So when you're joining, you're committing yourself to doing the mission, being a part of this. You're not just going to show up for the social events and head out. We also have officer review boards now. We're not just picking Joe Smith because he's popular or he has deep pockets. Our officers are now going to have to pass reviews to make sure that they're capable and competent as leaders and good with the paperwork and the budgeting. And we're also able to disband companies. If you don't measure up to the standard, you fail an inspection, you don't have enough numbers, you won't end up surviving as a militia company. Like right now, if we all said we were going to be a company, we don't have 60 people here right now, so they would disband us. We'd all have to go join different companies. So we're still going through a lot of change. There's roughly 1 commissioned officer for every 13 men at this point. And there was different districts, divisions in the state that didn't have companies that there would be a general in charge of. Just a general floating out there. We need uniformity. Not everybody's doing stuff the same. They have different ways that each company's doing stuff. We need to standardize that. We have span of control issues. We have all these officers, very top-heavy. Who's in charge? We get up onto a scene for something. Say there's a labor dispute or there's a natural disaster. Who's running the show? We don't have funding. Everything's coming out of the men's pockets, out of the community's pockets. And uniforms and equipment, we need to upgrade that stuff. We're still using Civil War stuff. The regular armies use the trapdoor Springfields. They're getting all this good canvas equipment. We're still using what we used, at Bull Run in Gettysburg. So 1877 is a big year for change, a big catalyst for change. The big thing was the strikes and the revolts. 1877 was a big thing out in Pittsburgh area. There was a railroad labor dispute, and it ended up taking over the whole state essentially. This is the governor's office. He rolled out there in a train, and this is Governor Hartranft right here, leading from the front. So this was a time where the governor of the state, just like now, they're still the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, but the governor had a full military uniform, all the trappings and equipage, the sword, the horse, the whole 9 yards. So he'd be out leading from the front. So to kind of put it in a modern sense, you imagine our governor showing up to like an emergency or something in the camouflage uniform, the plate carrier, and the helmet and everything. It seems silly now, but back then that's how it was. And here's some of what Pittsburgh looked like when they started the fires and everything. They brought units from out in the Philly area, out in the middle part of the state, and they even brought the regular army in at one point. We lost confidence in some of the commands due to that incident. 2 companies of the 8th, there's one out of Lebanon and Company A out of York. They didn't show up when they were ordered to. In York, the captain showed up at the armory. I believe there was an NCO and 2 privates, and nobody else showed up, so he told them to go home. And he went up to Harrisburg to face the music, and they disbanded that company immediately. Out in the Reading area, there was almost blue on blue. They almost had a fight amongst National Guard units until they were able to defuse the situation and send one company out one way, one out the other. Out in Pittsburgh, the 14th Regiment, they stacked arms and they didn't want to participate, because they had, friends that were in that industry, or those were their neighbors. And there was issues with that where, the loyalties weren't to the mission and to the unit. We have poor organization. Who's in charge of these things? What's our standard procedure for for doing different missions and how do we respond? And for the strikes, a lot of it was they wanted the National Guard to come out to be the policeman. Whenever the local law enforcement got overwhelmed, they were just like, oh, call the National Guard. And it ended poorly here. This is right out of the Adjutant General report, and right here it's saying, the regiment is the unit of our service, almost always is the body that must be depended on. So we need to stop having these individual companies. We need to work as a regiment. We need to work on a bigger span of control, have this larger unit. We need to make sure everything's, everybody's trained up. Right now it's cumbersome and unwieldy and with a disproportionate allotment of officers to men. It's still top heavy. We need new uniforms. We're still in the Civil War stuff. A lot of the uniforms are made for looking nice, doing parades and drills. They're not made for field use. And this is right out of the Adjutant General's report. They want a uniform and equipment similar to what the United States Army is using for fatigue use. And we need more modern arms and equipment. They're using the trapdoor Springfield. They have the 50-70 though, which is not what the regular Army is using. And they really want the 45-70. And the other reason the state ended up going to it is because they stopped making the ammunition for the older rifle. The state tried to produce their own for a while, and they just weren't able to continue it. So in 1879, the Pennsylvania Division forms. The National Guard of Pennsylvania, it used to be divisions all around the state. They struck that. They brought it down into 5 brigades, and it was 1 division. March 1879, Governor Hoyt appoints Major General John Hartranft as the first commander of the NGP division. There's General Hartranft. His statue is right out in front of the Capitol in Harrisburg.
Where was he from?
I'm not sure. He's a Civil War veteran. I believe he's a Medal of Honor recipient as well for his actions in Bull Run. And this would be the day that in 1879, that's when the division is formed. So we have the oldest division because of this. Also in 1879, the Keystone that we all know, and it's also in our insignia, that was made the official insignia of the National Guard to be worn on the top of the caps. We all know the red one now, or the black one on the camouflage uniform. We had red, we had white, blue. We had one that had a diagonal of blue and white. We had one that had a blue one superimposed over white. There was even a yellow and a gold one at one point for the different organizations. So it was a pretty colorful insignia at one point. And then one that was of all 3 like this. So all that trouble, all that, the heartache of trying to get everybody on the same page, get everything modernized, it pays off. We have the Johnstown flood of 1889. And the whole city, this is actually Johnstown, was ringed by different outposts of the National Guard. Nobody was allowed in or out without a pass. Because there's looters going in. Anytime there's a bad accident or disaster, the bad people show up to take advantage. So this is a picket post. You have some guys on watch, a couple guys resting, but that's their area to guard. Here's another view of it. You can see that the city's just wasted. So a lot of the cleanup too, the National Guard is there. It's a set of, it's an armed force that's able to, has a large group of bodies that can help move stuff and help with the relief effort. Here's one of the camps in town. And all the supplies coming in, they're coming into town. That's who's going to be unloading a lot of that too, is the National Guard. Just like now, whenever there's a disaster. We had the Homestead Strike 1892. National Guard deploys again. You have out in Homestead, Pennsylvania, all of a sudden this division shows up. All these tents. Here's the factory back here. Here's all the fences around it. And this overt presence. You have a squad of men right here, marching their fixed bayonets in their equipment, marching around town. Just like the beat cop that's out patrolling the city. There isn't going to be any crime when the police are around. And this is the same idea. They're out there, and they're using it as a training evolution as well. While they're out there, they're doing maneuvers and they're doing drills, making good use of their time. But they're also being seen, which is something that's going to keep things from happening. I like this picture as well because you have the town down here, You have the camp, and you have all these guys lined up, you have the colors out. Notice everybody's wearing white gloves. This is a dress parade. So it's a military ceremony. You do it in the morning, and you do it in the evening. It's a time to take roll. It's a time to pass on orders to the officers or the NCOs, the men, talk about the plan of the day. But it also shows everybody down here what's up here. So at least twice a day, they see all these men lining up. They have all their rifles. The bayonets are fixed. We know that there's an armed force here ready to put down any kind of rebellion if something would happen. And they're just doing their normal routine, what they would do every day. It's just that overt presence is keeping the peace. These are actually members of the 8th. They're picking up their tent poles, and there's some tents and some cots in there. And they said that this response to the labor revolt was markedly better than 1877. And I believe New York was going through a similar issue that we had in 1877, the same year. And they put in their newspapers, Pennsylvania has done so well, compared to how things went before. You could take a lesson from the Pennsylvanians. We had the Hazelden Strike, 1897. This is also known as the Latimer Massacre. This is actually a picture from that event. You had the miners, mainly immigrants. English was not their first language. And there was an issue with the law enforcement, and somebody shot first, and then everything kind of broke loose, and it got pretty dicey. It was pretty well calmed down by the time the National Guard got there, but their overt presence of just being there kept anything further from happening. So I'm going to pass this off to Pete, and he'll tell you a little bit about the Gobin Guards' early history.
Gobin Guard right here. He was a general Gobin. You know the armorer was right here. From the Lutheran Church, St. Paul.
All righty, folks. Well, thank you, Jim, for the quick synopsis on the National Guard up to this date. And so we're going to cycle into a little more of a local history than an overview at this point. So we're going to get into a little bit about our local company here in Carlisle. Oh, wrong way. So the Gobin Guards. The first time the Gobin Guards show up in any sort of newspaper or documentation is in January of 1879. At this point, there's rumblings that a new militia company is going to be started in the Carlisle area. There's a lot of excitement amongst the citizens of the community about having the new militia unit in town. Again, as we see, this is very early. The newspapers are very excited about the possibility. This is, again, just the next day from the previous article that we saw yesterday. Now we fast forward to March. Now the Gobin Guards have an official packet waiting in the Adjutant General's office for approval to become an organization. During this time, they are also still accepting applicants into their newly formed company. We're not sure what's going to come of it yet. We're not sure how many people we're going to need, but we're still accepting applicants. Come down if you're willing and able. We want to have you. So the first time the Gobin Guards appear in the Adjutant General's report is on March 27th of 1879, and you see that these are the 3 officers of the company. Thomas Riley is the first captain of the Gobin Guards. The Gobin Guards are officially Company G of the 8th Regiment. A little further on in the year, the paper is now saying that we are Company G. The interest is still very high. We're still really looking forward to what's going to become of our membership. The initial members are now sworn in. We actually had a notary public. General Allen is an ex-brigadier general of the state troops. I believe he was also a Civil War veteran, wounded at Antietam. He was local here in Carlisle and served as an acting notary public. He actually swore in the first troops to the Gobin Guard. General Orders number 1 and 2 were issued. So the General Orders, which are listed right down here, the General Order number 1 is appointing the officers of the organization, the initial officers of the Gobin Guards. A couple guys that you're going to see in here, W.G. Speck, John G. Bob. We'll hear about them as we go along here this evening. I'm sorry. General Order number 2 also speaks on the training regimen for these men. Now, these men are brand new. They've never had any military service, or if they have had military service, it was left over from the Civil War. So what you see here is that the non-commissioned officers are going to meet on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for theoretical instruction, practical and theoretical instruction. Then on Mondays and Fridays is squad drills. So some of these guys were meeting at the local armory 4 times a week to get up to snuff with what the rest of the Pennsylvania National Guard needed them to be. 4 times a week, and you figure, you know, a guardsman these days is lucky if they're having a drill once a month. Maybe they'll go on their annual training for 2 weeks a year. Maybe they'll be deployed on another training exercise, but you know, generally, it's the once a month, 2 weeks a year type deal. These guys are going 4 times in a week, let alone having families and occupations and everything else. That's right, they didn't have any television, so what else would you do? All right, so here's the listing of the original roll. Again, we see William Speck here, we see John Bob, Thomas Riley as captain. One of the very interesting things to point out about this article from the Carlisle newspaper is we also have the occupations of what these men are. So we have shoemakers, we have jewelers, farmers. Down here a little further, we have lawyers. A real interesting, again, going off of people who we thought would have been omitted from National Guard service. We have a policeman. There's students, tinkers, all sorts of different various trades, just like in the National Guard today, all walks of life were joining the organization. Another man to keep in the back of your head here is Edward Conlin. We'll see him on the next slide. So the Gobin Guards are still accepting applications. They're still vetting applications, making sure that the men who are applying to the organization are serviceable, that they will be able to withstand the musters of the National Guard. We're also seeing over here that now a local citizen has put up some money to create a medal for the guardsmen to wear, whoever is the best marksman. So we have a little intercompany competition. And that competition, the medal for that competition is on display in Conlin's jewelry store. So if you notice on the last slide, we had a couple guys in the company who were jewelers. Conlin was obviously one of them. And he was proud enough to display that in his jewelry store. That medal will always be known as the Sponsler Medal. We also have uniforms being made in Philadelphia, so that way our new company will look like all their comrades and the rest of the Guard. So this is the first known photo of the Gobin Guards. Best recollection that we can give is that this photo is from approximately 1885. If you notice, they are still using, as Jim spoke about earlier, they are still using the 50-70 rifles opposed to the 45-70s. And you notice their uniforms are a little newer, but still a little behind the Federal Army at this point. So this slide is the inspection report of 1886. What we see in the inspection report here is that the inspection report is reading that there is very superior military bearing and a fine-looking body of men. Discipline was excellent. Clothing, arms, equipment, excellent condition. Books and papers neatly kept. All the movements and executions of the drill done exactly the way it's supposed to. Captain Watts is now the captain of the company, and this is right after the armory was built here on Northwest Street, so the Adjutant General did make note of that being taken care of. Captain Watts is going to assume command from Captain Bob, who we heard about earlier. Captain Bob assumed it from Captain Riley. Captain Riley was only the captain of the Gobin Guards in 1879. He was about 1-year term before it was turned over to Bob. Bob then was promoted within the regiment. He was promoted to major and held various operational and organizational standings within the regiment, mainly quartermaster and ordnance stores. So now, Jim spoke a little bit about the homestead. We're going to have some local articles here regarding how the Gobin Guard mobilized for the homestead. This would be the first time that the Gobin Guard would be called into service of the Commonwealth since their conception. The mobilization of the National Guard spread like wildfire through Carlisle, even prior to the military orders being issued. The departure was met with a very large military send-off, and the local newspaper reported the guardsmen would face little to no opposition. This little clip from the newspaper describes one of the corporals of the guards going down to the local hardware store to inform another corporal that, hey, we're mobilizing, you got to come with me. If you notice that there must have been a size difference between the two of these, because it says here about the shouldered musket was standing in the store and escorted the big corporal uptown. The little guarding the big guardsman attracted considerable attention. There must have been a Mutt and Jeff type look at it as they were walking up through town. For the 8th Regiment, this was indeed the case that they would not receive any opposition at Homestead. The troops of the 8th Regiment found themselves in a security presence. Like Jim stated, these guys were standing around, just making themselves known to keep the peace in the town. Picketers attempted to sway the troops by using their emotions as a common citizen. Hey, you're not always a guardsman. You work in a factory, you work in a railroad, you do this, you do that. You know, we have common interests here other than you being here as a guardsman. Why are you here standing guard? You should be with us, that kind of thing. But the 8th Regiment stood their ground and did not let those kind of things sway. Some of the picketers even tried to convince those guys to go into the different saloons. You know, I figure if you get them all drunk up, maybe they'll throw down their arms and take up our side of things. Didn't work that way. After 3 weeks of being on assigned duty, the 8th Regiment was relieved and was sent home at that point. General Gobin, who was commander of the 3rd Regiment of the National Guard, the 3rd Brigade of the National Guard, noted the events as follows. And this is directly out of the Adjutant General's report as well. This tour of duty of the National Guard has become part of the history of the state and has become a subject of criticism and comment of military men throughout the nation. The rapid concentration, the provision for transportation, the organization of several departments, the zeal for military devotion of the officers and men are certainly credible in the highest degree. So the operation itself may not have been the most popular, but even the commander of the 3rd Brigade, General Gobin, he was very proud of the fact that the 8th Regiment performed very professionally in their duties to the Commonwealth. In 1897, we mobilized again for the riots up in Hazleton. I have to say, this is by far my favorite anecdote that I've ever read about anybody in the National Guard. This anecdote is taken directly out of the Adjutant General's report again. And this is Colonel McGee, who is now the colonel of the 8th Regiment, and he is describing how he received his orders and how he dispersed his orders to his subordinates. So I'm going to read this here for you. And it says, we start here. I was aroused by a telegraphic message from you ordering me to rendezvous my battalion in Harrisburg, informing me that you had notified the companies and that I should notify the staff officers in Carlisle. The operator who delivered the telegram to me had also your message for Captain Speck of Company G. He said he could not leave his office long enough to deliver the same to Captain Speck, who lived some distance away. As he was the railroad operator, he's also being the telegraph deliverer. As he was the railroad operator and was directing the movement of trains, I told him I would take charge of that message, which I did. The early morning was beautifully moonlit, so mounting my bicycle, I was within 10 minutes at Captain Speck's house and delivered your message. And within a half hour had notified 3 staff officers residing in Carlisle. About 6 o'clock a.m. I received a second message from you in the following words: rendezvous your battalion in Harrisburg as soon as possible and move on to Hazleton, reporting there to General Gobin commanding. So not only did the colonel of the regiment say, you know what, I got this, let me get on my bicycle and run down to the captain's house. He awakes Captain Speck, who I'm sure was very surprised to see his colonel standing at his door at 5 o'clock in the morning. notifying him of the mobilization in '97. Within 3 hours, the Gobin Guard was assembled on a train heading for Harrisburg. In fact, they show up in Harrisburg about 9:30 that morning. So it really proves to show, this is a time where we don't have automobiles, we don't have cell phones. So you're hand-carrying messages, delivering messages on bicycles. And not all these guys live in town. It's not like they all live a block from the armory. I mean, we're talking about guys that are scattered to the wind across Cumberland County. In 3 hours' time, they were able to fully mobilize for Hazleton. Again, it's more so the presence of the National Guard in the area than actually using any force. They did not encounter any resistance while they were at Hazleton, although again, threats were made on a personal level as well as an organizational level, that were encouraging violence. Again, General Gobin is noted by saying that the appearance of the detachment of infantry upon the scene or in the vicinity was usually sufficient enough to disperse and quiet the apprehension. The mission would continue to provide peace and order to the area over the next few weeks, and the 8th Regiment would stay on orders until October 4th. Again, we're looking at a very small amount of time, 3 weeks for the mobilization. So this is another slide that I came across when we were looking in the newspapers. And for those of you who are not familiar, Mount Gretna was the Pennsylvania National Guard training area prior to Fort Uniontown Gap. A lot of us know Mount Gretna for their art show. We know them for their lake. It's very much a recreational neighborhood now. 125 years ago, 140 years ago, it was very much a different kind of place. So this little anecdote I found absolutely hilarious because I think it speaks to the heart and soul of every guardsman. So they're talking about putting together the commissary for a annual training out at Mount Gretna, and it's Corporal Kuhn, Privates Henry, and Newcomer, and Cost. They leave for the day to make the necessary preparations in accommodating of Company G. But one of the men in the commissary is speaking of a certain Carlisle citizen who once was given $2.50 to purchase provisions for a little private picnic. He invested $2.40 in beer and 10 cents in water crackers. I mean, it sounds like a pretty good picnic to me. I don't know about the rest of you. A cute little anecdote from the time, and it really speaks to the men of Company G. So 1898 comes around, and we find ourselves at war with Spain. Again, right out of the newspapers, this is the notice that was officially printed in the newspaper that the Gobin Guards are ordered to assemble. We are going to war. You notice here, W.G. Speck, he is now captain of the Gobin Guards. Speck was one of the original members of the Guards, starting as a second sergeant of the Guards in 1879. He is also a Civil War veteran. No, he is not a Civil War veteran, I don't believe. Sam Betts is now his first sergeant. Sam came in line in the Guards in about the mid-'80s. You start seeing his name pop up. Both men are buried here in Carlisle. Betts is in the Old Town Cemetery. Speck is out on the outskirts of town, heading out 641 past Rustic Town in that cemetery that's out there. I'm sorry, I don't know what the name of that one is. This slide's a little fuzzy to see, but this is the actual proclamation that shows that, hey, we are at war in Spain and we are activated. The National Guard Force is hereby authorized. You will be volunteering for United States service. So the 8th Regiment heads out to Mount Gretna on April 28, 1898. This picture here is of a Company G Guardsman out at Mount Gretna. You notice his uniform is still very Civil War-ish looking. However, we do have some leggings now. We have a new modern style cap. We won't see a full khaki uniform until after the Spanish-American War. Again, these are the men of Company G. Prior to leaving for the Spanish-American War, this was taken at Mount Gretna. So May 11th and 12th, the regiment is mustered into United States service after recruiting was completed. The Gobin Guards were actually mustered in. They were the first organization to be mustered in in the 8th Regiment. They were able to meet quotas and muster in on the 11th. They were the first company of the 8th Regiment to muster in the federal service. So you might be saying, okay, well, what needs to be recruited? They have their company. Why is this the case? So federalization requirements made by the United States Army, the active duty Army, was requiring that you had 90 men for service. Gobin Guards only had 63 at the time, as did some of these other regiments, some of these other companies. They had a lower number of men. So they had to go back. They said, hey, we will love to have you, but you need to boost your numbers before we can accept you into federal service. So they had to go back to their local communities, recruit, come back to Mount Gretna and say, we got enough guys, accept us. So the Gobin Guards were the first ones out of the 8th Regiment to be able to accomplish that. Here they are. This is Pennsylvania troop. It is not the 8th Regiment, but they are swearing into federal service at this point in time. The way that process worked, at this time you would have to swear, you would have to resign out of state service and volunteer into federal service. That's what you see happening here. This is the 8th Regiment, probably in the beginning of May when they are about ready to leave. This is the entire regiment. You see they have their backpacks, they have their colors, they're in full accoutrements, ready to roll. Probably what they're waiting on is the train to take them away. May 19th, the 8th Regiment finally receives their orders to leave. And where do they go? Falls Church, Virginia. Not very far. They leave between 7 and 9 in the morning, and they're in Falls Church by the afternoon. So a lot of the glory of going away to Cuba or Puerto Rico sort of goes womp 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 womp, and you're left with just down the road right outside Washington D.C. This is a photograph of an 8th Regiment soldier taken at Camp Alger, Virginia. Harkening back to some information that Jim was talking about earlier, there's the Sons of Union Veterans Medal that he's wearing as well. July 20th, very interesting presentation occurred. The ladies from the town of Shippensburg visit the regiment and provide them with a regimental flag. This is noted in the Adjutant General's report, but it really doesn't go into much detail as to why they decided to do this, other than, hey, our boys are deployed, or excuse me, our boys are mobilized, they're down at Camp Alger, we need to do something nice for them, like a lot of the auxiliary type units would do. And there it is as of today. So, I believe this one is still, this one is in the state archives up in Harrisburg. You can make an appointment to go see this flag. The War with Spain ends on August 12th. So we think, hey, all right, the war's over. Due to a breakout of typhoid fever, the 8th Regiment is ordered to Camp Meade in Middletown, Pennsylvania. And for those of you who might be like, okay, well, where in Middletown is that? You're looking at the area where Penn State Harrisburg is, where the airport is. That was all Camp Meade in 1898. Here's pictures of the 8th Regiment at Meade. In late October, now the 8th Regiment has been at Camp Meade since the end of August. By the late October, the 8th Regiment finds themselves in Philadelphia for the Peace Jubilee Parade. You know, the grand fanfare of the time was that at the end of every war, you'd have a grand parade, a review of the troops, that kind of thing. These guys are really thinking, hey, we're going home. This is a picture from the Jubilee Parade. You notice the ranks of troops marching down the streets of Philadelphia. So, surprise, the 8th Regiment gets orders again to move to Camp McKenzie, Georgia. And they would not muster out until March of 1899, 3 months after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which was the official conclusion of the war with Spain. This young chap right here is Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes joined the 8th Regiment, Company G, on May 7th, 1898. So if you recall those dates again, this fellow here was one of the men who needed to be recruited in order for Company G to meet their federal quota. Again, this is Company G at Camp McKenzie. They got themselves a mascot now. And we all think Georgia, it doesn't snow in Georgia. Well, it certainly did in the winter of 1898 and 1899. These fellows are Company G members shoveling snow outside their tents. So the war's over. Now we're looking at 1899, 1900, that kind of thing. The entire National Guard is mustered out of United States service. If you remember me stating that these men had to resign from the National Guard to become members of the federal service, well, now we're doing the exact opposite. We're resigning out of the federal service and becoming part of the Pennsylvania National Guard again. The commands would return to their pre-war strengths. Again, we had to have this big muster up for the war. Well, now we can go back to our smaller companies, our 40, 50-man companies. So the NGP decides, the NGP, learning from their experiences with their mobilization, says, hey, there's some things we've got to change around here. We're going to start looking at what we can do to modernize our forces here at home. Again, this is the 8th Regiment on parade. The uniforms you see here, again, very similar to what you saw prior to the Spanish-American War. Again, it'll be a couple more years till we start seeing what we would consider a more modern military uniform. So in the 1902, the 8th Regiment was mobilized for the 1902 coal strike. The 1902 coal strike in Shenandoah, which is up in northeast Pennsylvania, it was the first strike to be settled by federal interaction. The federal government actually came in and helped litigate what the negotiation terms were going to be between the strikers and the owners. First time in history that this ever happened. Again, not much of a tussle between the National Guard and the strikers, but again, we're there as a police presence to help maintain order and make sure everything stays civilized. So now we're going to start looking like the modern army. In 1903, the Militia Act of 1903 comes out. It's also known as the Dick Act. This comes out from learning about the hurdles that we had in 1898. Differences in uniformings, difference in weapons, difference in funding from state to state. So now we have this goal that we're going to mobilize these National Guards to support the active force. But they're all on different budgets. They're all wearing different uniforms. They're all carrying different weapons. So we need to do something to organize that better. So the Dick Act achieves that by allowing funding to the National Guards to make sure that they are up to a certain standard in uniform and that they are up to a certain standard of weapons. Still maybe lagging behind the U.S. Army, but lagging behind the U.S. Army in a 3 to 5 year stance versus a 20-year stance. In 1916, we have the National Defense Act. The National Defense Act authorized the President to mobilize the National Guard in case of emergency or in case of war or national emergency. Again, this basically is stating that instead of having to resign out of the state service and volunteer for federal service, we can now do it with one swift strike. The President says, I need Pennsylvania troops to go do this. Pennsylvania troops, get up and go. There's no formality, there's no hurdles to jump through with that. These are men of Company G at a Pennsylvania Reading Railroad Station in Shenandoah. Again, this would be 1902. If you look, these guys still are using the trapdoor rifles. They still have the Mills pattern cartridge belts. Still look very, very Spanish-American war-like. But really, for our state, this is pretty modern looking. In 1916, we have the Punitive Expedition. Pancho Villa is bouncing back and forth across the Mexican border. The Punitive Expedition then causes the National Defense Act to come into being. Within 30 days of the National Defense Act being passed, Pennsylvania is fully mobilized and heading to Texas. Over the course of the Punitive Expedition, Pennsylvania sends 14,000 National Guardsmen to Texas. They are in Texas for approximately 6 months. Come back in the winter of 1916-1917. They're home for about 3 months before they're mobilized for the Great War. Again, what you see up here, this is the 8th Regiment Machine Gun Company. You see the machine guns right there? But if you look at them, these guys look much more like the modern army, much more like the army that you see during the Great War. So where do we go from there? So from the Punitive Expedition, from World War I, we end up with our modern lineage. These fellows up here are all members of the Gobin Guard. They were all members who, for the most part, ended up in the 112th Infantry Regiment. Most of them were wounded or taken capture at Phoenix and Fimet during the Great War. These gentlemen here are all officers of the 104th Cavalry. Both units, the 112th and the 104th, are still around, as well as other lineages that harken back to the Gobin Guard of the era that we just spoke about. So the Gobin Guard's first armory. So a lot of guys know the armory is right around the street here, but in our research we found, we're reading some documents and we found, well, they had a first armory. So it was Goodwill Hall, which to our research, the best we can tell, is at 22 South Hanover Street, which is right next to the Comfort Suites. This map is from 1872. You can see Goodwill Hose Company right there. And that is the current street view of the hall. The hall was used as a firehouse. Obviously, you can see that on the doors at the bottom. But like most firehouses, they did have vacancies upstairs that they would rent out to different civic organizations, National Guard being one of them. It was noted in some of the research that we were doing that the Gobin Guard loved playing croquet, that they would have croquet tournaments and that kind of thing. Well, if you notice here, this is the back lot of that building. That's a nice big backyard for holding croquet tournaments, and so I guess you can set up a pretty good course back there. So now the second armory. Now this is the armory that most of us are familiar with, is over here on Northwest Street. Construction was authorized in 1880, so a year after the conception of the unit, construction was authorized. Located on Northwest Street and West Locust Avenue. It was completed in 1881 for a cost of $5,000. That $5,000 came out of the membership. The membership built their own armory. They did not contract anybody to do it. They used all their own trades inside the company to build the armory. It was dedicated on Thanksgiving Day of 1881 with over 500 attendees. Now, if you guys are local to town, which I'm assuming you are, that building's not very big. I can't imagine 500 people trying to pile in there or around that building. And there it is in a early 1900s appearance. Now you have a couple more trees sprout up in front of it. You can't see the beautiful keystone that says Gobin Guards in front of us unless you are on the sidewalk. But
It's part of St. Paul's.
yes, yep, I was going to bring that up. It's I believe it's the stock hall or the social hall for the St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Yeah. So here's some articles talking about the armory dedication. So we are talking about 500 people being present. We're talking about multiple military bands being present. We're talking about the Harrisburg Symphony being present. We're talking about taking excursion tickets that are going to bring people from all throughout central Pennsylvania to the Cumberland Valley for the dedication of the armory. We're going to have a grand march that begins at 9 p.m. All throughout the night, there's a big potluck dinner. The members of the organization are saying, hey, we're expecting 500 men in town. We're calling on the citizens of the community to help feed these guys, make sure that we have a nice spread for them. And it must have been quite the party, because if we read here, arrangements are being perfected for a special train to leave Carlisle at 4 a.m. on Friday to accommodate those parties in Harrisburg who wish to take part in the ball and return for their day's work. So it must have gone throughout the night that these guys must have been having a gay old time throughout the night that they quartered their own train to take people back to Harrisburg. So some of the other things that we run into, the article over here is speaking about feeding the amount of people that are going to be coming to this and calling upon the citizens to help with that. We're also starting to see that the Gobin Guards are starting to do exhibition drills, which become very popular throughout their tenure in town. The social events of the armory, again, these guys spent their own money to build their armory, so now they want to recoup those funds, you know. Similar to a fire department who needs to buy a new fire engine or put an addition on a building or something like that. You know, they do these fundraisers, you know, they didn't have bogeys back then, or maybe they did, but not in Carlisle, so they're looking at other ways to make some money. So we're doing some military drill exhibitions. We're doing fundraiser and social events. We're doing dances and balls. We start with we start with banquets. You know, these guys were, some of these guys had Civil War lineage, some of these guys, you know, obviously the military is very pomp and circumstance, so we're going to hold banquets to toast our commanders, toast the men who have gone before us. This is another good clip out of the newspaper. Everything you want to eat, lots of pretty girls can be found at the Gobin Guards Festival. The Gobin Guards also, they set up a course of lectures. They set up a course of lectures for the community to come in and hear different scholars speak in the armory about different topics. Again, I'm sure for a nominal fee, but we're helping recoup that cost. Excuse me. Again, the Gobin Guards to a point went on tour. Different organizations would be having their fairs for their fundraising, and they bring the Gobin Guards in as a source of entertainment. The citizens loved watching their drill. They were very proficient at their drill. And it's noted time and time again throughout the newspaper that these guys are the cream of the crop. You're going to want to come see these guys drill. Masquerade Ball. I haven't heard anybody hold a masquerade ball in years, but the Gobin Guards held them pretty frequently. This one's on New Year's night. We also have one on Easter Monday. I don't know why Easter Monday was picked for a masquerade ball, but hey, why not? It brings in money, so why not? This is talking about a reunion and banquet of the Guard. It's also talking about the toasts that are going to be given. We're giving toasts to the National Guard is going to be given by JPS Gobin. The 1st Squad, music, the 8th Regiment by Colonel McGee, State of Pennsylvania by Captain Strine, the absent members, the Gobin Guards by Lieutenant Speck at that time. And I'm not sure what this toast is, but it's called the Awkward Squad. So I'm not sure what that one's about, but I'd love to find out what that toast is. So we're doing a lot of talk about the Gobin Guards, but I'm sure somebody's saying, who's this guy Gobin and why does he need a guard? So Gobin is John Peter Schindel Gobin. He is a Civil War veteran. In 1861, he's the first lieutenant of the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry, which was a 90-day unit. When that unit's time of service is completed, he then captains Company C of the 47th Pennsylvania Infantry. Later on in the war, he ends up becoming colonel of that regiment. In 1865, he's promoted to Brevet Brigadier General of the 19th Corps, and he's a provost marshal after the war. I believe in the Lynchburg area of Virginia was the territory that he was ending up overseeing. In 1866, he becomes a GAR and Mollis member. In 1870, he forms the Coleman Guards of Lebanon. This is a Pennsylvania militia unit that Gobin decides to form in the city of Lebanon. It's one of the first units it's one of the first times that you see Gobin come up in the National Guard lineage. In 1874, he's appointed the colonel of the 8th Infantry Regiment. In 1884 to 99, in 1884, he's elected senator to the 17th Senate District, and he remains a senator until 1899. In 1885, he's promoted from colonel of the 8th Regiment to general of the 3rd Brigade. In 1891, he is president pro tem of the Pennsylvania State Senate. Now, if you notice, he's starting to get kind of busy, because we're going to be brigadier general of the 3rd Brigade of the National Guard. We're also going to be president pro tem pretty much at the same time. Plus my regular Senate seat. He's getting very, very busy. In 1897, he adds to his busyness and he becomes the National Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic. So he's overseeing any Grand Army of the Republic member from Pennsylvania to California, Maine to Florida. 1898, for Spanish-American War, he receives a commission as a Brigadier General. He resigns his commission to pursue a political campaign as Lieutenant Governor. He serves as Lieutenant Governor from 1899 to 1903. He then comes back to the National Guard and serves as the Major General and Commander of the NGP Division. So he oversees the entire National Guard Division in 1906. 1907, he decides to retire from his service. And unfortunately, in 1910, he died after a very long and service-oriented life. So now another local history spot is Pine Grove Furnace. Pine Grove Furnace was a very popular destination for the annual picnics of the Gobin Guard. It also served as an exhibition arena and as a recruiting tool. The Gobin Guards would often do civilian marksmanship programs, not only using military marksmanship, but they would also have, hey, Joe's hardware store is going to come up and shoot against the Gobin Guards, and we're going to see who the better shot is, that kind of thing. Most of the outings that we've found are typically held around the Independence Day holiday. So here's a news clipping from August 14th of 1879 that talks about the last picnic, and it was a big bonanza for the company. Here's another one that shows the schedule. So we got Gobin Guards on July 3rd. And then, again, just like our armory dedication, we're going to have trains coming from all over central Pennsylvania up to Pine Grove. Check us out. See what's going on. And this is back in the day when Pine Grove Park was very active, you know, and much more than the natural estate park as we know it these days. So I'm actually going to hop back off, and Jim's going to hop back on here, and we're going to go over a couple details regarding some National Guard battlefield connections to the Gettysburg battlefield here. So thank you very much, and Jim will be with you momentarily.
All right, so everybody knows of Gettysburg. We know of the 3 days in July, but it actually served as a training ground for the U.S. Army and the National Guard on multiple occasions throughout the 18 and 1900s. So the very first one was called Camp Gettysburg. This is August of 1884. So a couple points here. You have the Virginia Memorial. This is the copse of trees, the angle. You have North Carolina Memorial. This was the whole area that the division encamped. All the brigades would have been set up in this area. All the mounted units, the cavalry, the artillery, and then the command would have been up here. And there would have been units from the regular army that would have come along as well as for mentoring and for helping with, you know, the lessons. So this is out in the area around Devil's Den and Little Round Top. This is the 3rd Regiment on parade. You'll get their picture taken on the Gettysburg battlefield. And a lot of these men here, I mean, this is only about 20 years after the Civil War. There's Civil War veterans in there. Some of these guys may have actually fought in Gettysburg. So it's kind of a neat homecoming for them. And then you have the newer guys that have come along. And they talked a lot about this in the reports and different things like that, about, you know, how special it was to come back to this area. Here's members of the NGP artillery. This is out there in that Little Round Top Devil's Den area. So for reference, that's over here. While the camp was over here, they used all this field was used as training. They had rifle ranges set up. There's a creek back this way. They were bringing water in through pipes. That was one of the issues they had for one of the encampments. The water company wouldn't turn the water on early. It was only for the days that it was contracted for, so they had an issue with that. I like this news clipping here. It talks about how Gettysburg's getting to be. And they said with the National Guard coming in, that they were anticipating the town would be $100,000 richer. The hotels reaped a golden harvest. The boarding houses were throwing their doors open. They were, you know, all the hotels, anywhere you could put people, because the National Guard was out there in the fields, but you also had the visitors. You had the veterans, the members of the GAR that were coming to check things out. Politicians, people just wanted to know what was going on. Whenever they had an annual encampment, there was always some kind of a following that would be there as well. And I said everybody made money. One of the boot blacks at the Eagle Hotel, Shoeshine person, he said he made $36 in 6 days, and a carriage driver made $71 above all his expenses. So pretty good money for 1884. This is another one I like. They're talking about how there wasn't a lot of price gouging. They treated everybody pretty well. And the old resident said, Gettysburg is getting to be a great place for tourists, and we don't want to drive them away by acquiring the reputation of Niagara Falls. So I guess Niagara Falls wasn't well thought of at that time. But it's interesting, in 1884, they're thinking of Gettysburg as a tourist place. So in 1892 is the high watermark dedication. And that's right up here in the middle. And this is the one you see with the copse of trees, and this is where Pickett's charge was repulsed. There's a lot of contention. This is the early days. A lot of contention about putting Confederate monuments up there, and the GAR was a big organization against that. You know, their saying was "one country, one flag," and they were all about patriotism and, you know, remember the sacrifices of their comrades. So there was a lot of contention about this monument. So if you've ever seen it, one side of the book has the Union regiments, one side has the Confederate regiments. So I guess a compromise is reached. But the 8th Regiment was actually called upon to be the honor guard for the President of the United States. The Marine Band was supposed to be there, yeah, President Harrison. There was the governors of the different states were supposed to be there, and it was supposed to be a very big event. So they had special trains that would come up, and they spent the day there in Gettysburg for that. And this is another thing to talk about the high watermark monument. Unfortunately, the president did not come out. Being the Civil War vet himself, it's speculated that he didn't want to be present for commemorating a monument that, you know, had the Confederate regiments on it. So he elected to pass on that. But they said the 8th Regiment had a really good time. They enjoyed their time there at Gettysburg. Pennsylvania Day. This is in 1889. So this was the big day. It was actually multiple days. But a lot of the Pennsylvania monuments were dedicated in September of 1889. And this is from one of the newspapers talking about the commemoration. There was parades. The town was just mobbed. They had, just like when they came to do the drills, everybody was staying in the hotels, the boarding houses, and they actually had a camp for the veterans too. So this hotel, it doesn't exist anymore, the Springs Hotel. This would be located out over here. This is where the Gettysburg Country Club was. And then there's the little stream there, and there was a spring at one point. And then the GAR, they were encamped down here. And there's one of the interesting accounts talking about everybody going into town. The 12th Regiment of the Pennsylvania National Guard was there to kind of facilitate it. They served as the provost guard to kind of keep order. And the provost guard was chasing somebody down the street. And they ran into a guy from the 114th Pennsylvania. He was a Civil War veteran. And he fell down, and he broke something when he fell. And his comment was, you know, I went through the whole battle. And if you know your history, the 114th Pennsylvania, they got a real tight scrape up here in the peach orchard. They lost a good bit of men up there. And so he made it through all of that and got his injury in Gettysburg from somebody, you know, knocking him down, running away. And this is just a picture of one of the Pennsylvania monument dedications. You can see the state seal here. You see a lot of the white vests for the Pennsylvania Department. Camp Crawford would be 1894. Again, we're camping in the same areas, all the horses. The regular army is up here, and we're doing all the drills. And it's again, it was a really interesting event. Everybody was looking forward to it. Here's one of the news articles about it, and they were talking about, you know, saying, you know, how special of an event it was. You know, on these fields, there's guys who never left. You know, they were buried there. And they said that, you know, there's an example established by the bravery of these sons of Pennsylvania, the best remembrance of the dead and the greatest praise to the living. The battle and hardship in those days made the peace and quiet of these. The National Guard of 63 were here in war. Their sons today are here in peace, preparing for war. So, you know, this is 30 years after the battle, so, you know, their sons were there. And this is a good account, too. So apparently in 1884, everything wasn't the best. And so, you know, now the soldier boys are gathering at Gettysburg, and a fine lot of young men. They are quite different from the fellows who robbed restaurants some years ago and showed the white feather in danger. So they found beer bottles and like wine bottles out in the fields. They had to pay for damages. The state had to pay for. And the white feather, they're referring to 1877, the railroad riots. The National Guard has been vastly improved since those days. So they got a nice compliment there. And this is 1894. This is up at the High Water Mark Memorial. A bunch of guys stuck their bayonets in the ground, but they're posing in their uniforms. Probably a couple veterans here. So we have a couple upcoming events. The next Saturday is the Pine Grove Fall Furnace Festival. We're going to be set up out there. It runs from 11 to 7. It runs both days. We're just going to be there Saturday. So if you want to see what some of the earlier stuff looked like, the uniforms, the gear, the arms and rations and things like that, come out to the Fall Furnace Festival. And also next year is the 125th anniversary of the Spanish-American War. So we're putting a couple events on for that. And best way to keep track of that, follow our social media, and if you have any questions, reach out through any of these methods, reach out through email, contact the Historical Society, and we'll answer any questions that you have. But yeah, thank you for coming out. That's the end of it here.